Hi everybody, welcome to Bristol Tech Fest 2021. My name is Felicity Cowie and my session is called Why Scrutiny is Crucial to Innovation Success. And in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to show you a way of communicating about your innovation, about your business, so that it's easy for people to understand and therefore it's easy for them to spread the word about what you do. This is why it's important to the success of your innovation to be able to communicate it and let people have a look at it so that they can then talk about it themselves. So I'm going to come on to my next slide here, and it's a fantastic quote from Einstein. And he says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And he absolutely nails in this quote the reason why communications fail, because people just, if they can't understand something, they can't really communicate about it. They can't explain it simply, and therefore the listener can't understand it. And you kind of set this chain of communication failures in process. But the great news is if you can explain it simply and make it possible for other people to explain it simply, then you avoid all of those communication failures. You kind of eradicate them at source. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So what you need to be able to do to get the word out about your innovation, about your business, is you need to make it possible for people, starting with yourself, the person whose idea this is, the founder of your business, the creator of your innovation. You need to make it possible for you to scrutinize your innovation so that you can then understand it and you can then explain it. So you can move your way around this cycle, and then you can communicate to other people. So in the middle of this cycle, I've got like the one little person, that's you, the founder, the innovator on your own, going through this cycle. In doing that, you can then speak to your team or a small number of other people, and that then makes it possible for them to scrutinize the innovation, for them to understand it, and for them to explain it. And then they can then talk to another group of people, and on and on and on it goes. In theory, the thing is, it's quite difficult to get this right. And I've worked with an awful lot of clients, and a very, very common thing that they come to me and they want my help with is they say, I've been so clear. I've been very, very clear with my team. I've been very, very clear with the journalist, with the investor, with the talent I'm trying to hire. I've been really clear about what we do. But when I look at their reactions or the actions that they take, they're just not getting it. And I just can't understand why that's the case. And the reason that this fails is, I guess I would put the question to you is, do you ever like being told what to do and what to think? And obviously we don't. We don't like being told what to do, what to think, what to make of things. It's not in our human nature, even as babies, when people are trying to feed us, and clearly food is critical for our existence. What is so important to humans is to experience things for themselves. It's so deep wired into us. It's the way we're made. And so the Buddha actually himself comes out with this incredible phrase when he is encouraging people to come and learn from him. He says, come and find out for yourself what is truth, what is real. I think in that phrase, he kind of realized we don't want to be told what to do. We want to come and find out for ourselves. And his teaching is grounded in all of that. And so coming back to our model of how to get the word out, what you need to do is make it possible for not to tell people what your thing is, but make it possible for them to experience it for themselves. I don't necessarily mean, touch it or use it, although that can be extremely beneficial. But I mean, in this first instance, make it possible for them to scrutinize it, make it possible for them to understand it, to take it in, and then it makes it possible for them to decide if they want to, and then to go ahead and explain your innovation. You need to work with this to make this work. So that's all well and good. But of course, the question is, well, tell us how. And in a moment, I am going to tell you how. I'm going to show you my 3-step process, which gives you a clear and concise story, which helps you get that information out there, makes it possible for other people to engage with it, and it just drives this momentum, this cycle that I've been showing you. Before I come on to that, just want to quickly explain where I'm coming from on this, why this stuff interests me and how I know about it, how I work with it. I'm now a media relations coach, and I've helped some of the world's leading organizations gain extensive news coverage. And the reason I was able to do that really was before that, I was a journalist, and it is an estimate, but I think as a journalist, I was probably pitched around 100,000 stories, which gives me an insider's view on what breaks through in the media and why. And this is what I help companies with. But it goes a bit beyond that. It also gives me a view on what information works, what elements of stories of data kind of why do they work, why do they attract us, something that completely fascinates me. And I've worked on this now for between journalism and working in media relations, I think getting on for 25 years. And so my mission now, and the reason I'm giving this talk at the Tech Fest, is to help early stage businesses get ready for positive exposure. So let's move on to this 3-step process that's going to help you do that if you have an innovation or a business and you're wanting to start getting the word out about it and generating some positive exposure for yourself. So the first step is a step that most people I work with find an enormous relief. And that is to find existing sources of information about your innovation, about your business. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. That's why I've put a nice picture of a wheel on the left-hand side of this slide. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to sit in front of a horrifying blank screen or a blank sheet of paper trying to magic up this description. And you don't need at this very early stage to go to a branding agency and ask them to extract ideas out of your head. There's most definitely benefits in going to agencies and specialist writers and getting their help with wordsmithing and all of this later on. But the actual getting the information about your innovation, getting the really core facts about it, that's got to come from your brain, even if it's to put into a briefing document to ask somebody to put, words to it. You've got to get something out. And this is what I'm going to show you how to do now. The best place I have found to find these existing sources of information in businesses is where they have applied for money. So it's kind of like follow the money, which is why on the right hand side of this picture I've put some little coins tumbling down. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel, you need to follow the money. That's my kind of my guidance. And what I mean by that is go and have a look and see if you have some slides you use to pitch to investors, look at an application for a loan, for a grant, for an award, or a job advert you put together to attract some top talent to your business. And if any of these were successful, they're particularly good because they're the places where you've probably been really clear about who you are and what you do, because you most want people or money to come in and trust you. And this is where people tend to cut the big words and they just speak directly to what they have to offer. And this is what we need to start working with right now. If you don't have any of this stuff, and in fact, what you have is an idea in your head and on your very early stages, don't worry, it doesn't matter. Equally, if you've got these things and they haven't really been working for you, you're in exactly the right place. It doesn't matter. The next 2 steps are going to help you enormously. But if you do have this stuff, I would point you to that and say, have some faith in that. Bring that into this process. So then we're going to move on to step 2, this is sorry, I just saw my little slide there. Step 2, and that is to break down this raw information, or the stuff that you put in your slide decks or your job descriptions, or all of the things I just mentioned in that list above. You want to break this information down so that you yourself can scrutinize it. And the way that I encourage people to do this in my process is I give them this little grid, or a little 4-box grid, a little matrix or a quadrant, whatever you want to call it. And it has these 4 questions in it. Who are you? What do you do? How do you make it work? And where and when do you make it work? And in the next part of this process, I'm going to explain this in a bit more detail. But if you want to give this a go, you just need, one piece of paper and put these 4 headings on it. It's useful to put them all together because this exercise works really well if you can see everything together and you can move things from one box to the next if you want to, or just do an arrow pointing, goes into that one. It's helpful to see these things together. But that's the way to start the second part of this process. And so the stuff that you've got from the beginning part of the process, or the ideas you just have in your head, this is a messy process. However, it is structured and purposeful. So you're going to use these questions to unpack this information and sort of put it in a really scrappy way. Just throw it in there. You might duplicate, particularly between the what and the how. People find they do that. Doesn't matter. This is just to get it all out there. Then what I'm going to do, because I want to keep this talk short and just kind of give you the flavor of what you can do, is I'm going to sort of show you one I made earlier. This is my own business. So I'm going to just scroll up to this here and show you step 3 of this process, and that is that you take the stuff from the little grid, the quadrant, whenever you've been playing around with it and you've got to sort of where you're happy with it, you're going to start extracting that information and you're going to put it into a super shareable story of around 50 words. I'm going to explain that in a bit more detail in a moment, but just to explain this slide, hopefully with the colors and the arrows, I've shown you how you unpack the little matrix or quadrant into this 50-word paragraph, this story. So the who are you? I am, my business is called the Media Relations Coach, and you can see at the bottom, the other who are you bit is, that's my website. That's the best place to go and find out more about me if you want to. So if you are watching this and you already know the name of your business and you already know your core communications channel, if it's a website or whatever it is for your business, then brilliant. You've written the beginning and you've written the end of your story. You have written 2/3 of your story and you've done it in seconds. So I find people get that really energized with that. And then what you need to do is put in the stuff in the middle, which, yes, does take a bit of work. So the what do you do? In my case, it helps early stage businesses articulate what they do to ultimately win positive exposure and competitive advantage. How do you make that work? How do you make the what happen? Coaching starts with building a foundation story using proven tools and processes. And that's what we're touching on in this talk today. And then finally, the where and when do you make it work is this proof that what you do and how you do it has some kind of place in the world. Even if you're a new business, as a new idea, it can show where it's come from. In fact, my statement is a bit like that. So mine is about my 25 years experience of creating human-friendly information at the world's leading organizations. And that's mine is exactly 50 words. It doesn't have to be exactly 50, but it does need to be short. Hopefully you're getting a sense from this that it's not vague and it is giving you real detail, but it's also tantalizing enough for you to think, right, I'm going to go and have a look at this website if this is something that you're interested in. What you're going to notice, or maybe already occurring to you, is that what is missing from or appears to be missing from the little quadrant, from the 4 questions, is a question why. But the reason that that's missing is because, or it's not there, is because that question is in your audience, your customer, the reader, whoever is looking at this statement. This is in their head, why, and what they're thinking is, why does this matter to me? Why is this of interest to me? Why does this relate to me? And going back to the beginning of this talk and the baby and the Buddha and how we want to experience life for ourselves, we want to run these questions over incoming data, incoming information, because we're trying to work out, using these questions, how valuable something is to us, why it matters to us. If you think of Google being created in our image, as it were, then you could kind of look at these questions almost as our algorithms. And these are the spiders, these are the bots, these are the things we run over incoming data. Our brains are super duper efficient, and they're kind of figuring out, is this of interest to me? And then deciding yes or no. But no matter who we are, all humans kind of use these questions all the time. It seems to be the way our brains are made. It is true that certain people are more interested in the answers to some of these questions than others. There are some people, some personality types, and actually, some moods we can be in where the who really, really interests us. There's other times and other people where the how really, really interests us. And so the system that I teach and I advocate, what I feel is good about this is that it covers everything. So everybody who's got something they particularly want to know, they can go in and very, very fast, they can find some satisfaction to that primary thing they want to know about the who or the how or the what. The whole thing together, and that's why it needs to be short and around 50 words, really does that job of getting people really engaged, answering those questions and getting them into that next level of understanding about what you do. So what you're enabling with this process is for them to scrutinize you, to run their questions over you, to understand you, to decide if you're of interest, and then to start talking about what you do. So the last bit of my talk, I want to just give you some examples of this in action so you can see how it works. So let's look at it first of all at the level of a founder or a creator of an innovation, a business founder, or somebody who's got an innovation. So this is a quote from somebody I worked with very, very recently. So it's nice and current. And he speaks in this about, he used this process that I've just walked you through on this session. And he says, I can't tell you how empowered and how much energy this has unlocked for me. So that's this getting this process to work for you, just you on your own, to help you get clarity on what you're doing for yourself and how empowering that can feel. But then I want to take the next action, the next example of this in action, and this is going beyond the founder or the original innovator and looking at how you can use this process in your team, or maybe your co-founder. Maybe it's just two people at the moment. Maybe you have a little team. Maybe you have a big team. But what you can do is use the process that I've just described. Do it on your own. Everybody does it individually. You all work out the who are you, what do you do, how do you make it work, where and when do you make it work, and then get together as a team, as a pair, whatever, and just compare your matrices, your quadrants together to see if you are on the same page. Now, you don't have to bring the 50-word paragraphs, because that can be a bit more work. But this is just the quadrants. Just look in each box and see what everybody's put in them. Are you on the same page, or are you actually all thinking you're doing quite different stuff? It actually is quite a positive thing if you realize you do think you're doing different stuff. If you start to discover through this process that there's some real opportunities that somebody thinks they're doing, other people don't know about, you're now sharing them. But it also reveals like holes in the story where you can't actually consistently answer how you do what you do, because maybe you all think you do it in different ways. Maybe you can't even, you're not too clear what you do, because you may be going through a process of trying out different products and trying to find market fit. However, that is product level, and you may find it useful in this exercise, if you're doing it with other people, to see what's the level above the product, what's the business that can move into different products. So you can use my method to kind of help you with team building as well, and getting new members of your team involved really, really early on, and where you think you all are on that day. The good thing about this process is it can be repeated if you wanted to, monthly, quarterly, yearly. It's an ongoing process. It's not to lock things down. It's a nimble and agile process to help you work with your business and to talk about what you're actually doing in real time, which is really, really fundamental. What's very important about this as well, and the other benefit, is that if you do suddenly discover that you and your co-founder have completely different ideas about what you're doing in your business, thank goodness you've discovered them now, rather than when you're under the scrutiny of an investor or perhaps a journalist in your first big interview or something like that. You do not want that to be the first time you discover conflicts and holes in your story. You need to do this stuff yourself, first of all. When you do find conflicts and holes in your story, and you're going to, because that's part of life and creativity and innovation, this gives you early sight of what these things are and gives you the chance to think, right, what are we going to do about these? When this comes up, when we're asked, okay, you're saying this and you're saying this, how does that fit together? What's the answer you've got to take? What's your key line to take, as it were? And if you get asked something you don't know the answer to, you haven't worked it out yet. For example, maybe some great detail on how you make something work. You can acknowledge that, but you need to have a holding statement. What do you say when you're asked about why people don't feel too sure what your answer is to that? So doing this process can make you go out with your eyes much more wide open. So the very last in action that I want to show you is when you do go out into the big wide world with your innovation and you are pitching it, perhaps at an investor, perhaps at top talent. But what I'm going to talk you through the next couple of minutes is pitching to journalists, because it gives me an opportunity to share a few insider secrets about how journalists work, so that if you are on the cusp of working with the media, this could be useful to you in that scenario too. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, the document icon represents the press release that you're going to send out to some journalists or our journalist about a story about your business. And what people tend to think is that journalists are attracted to the headlines and press releases, or really crazy subject headers or stuff like that. But when I worked as a journalist, and often my job was to go and find new stories, I would kind of whiz past the subject headers and the headlines, and the first thing I would do would be to check the bottom of the press release to find out the source of the story, to see who they were. And what journalists and some marketing people call this bottom section, these words about the business, about you as the source, they sometimes call it a boilerplate. It doesn't really matter what the origin of that is, but I'm just mentioning the word in case you hear people saying, what's the boilerplate? That's what they're talking about. It's this basic, what I've just been teaching you to do. It's around 50 words that describes your business, describes you as the source. The reason this matters so much to journalists is that if they can see who you are as a source, they can then look at the story and see if you're the right person to tell the story in their view. And then that can help you really gain their interest, because they'll think, these are the people who've got a really good idea on this information. And the fact that they can communicate about themselves so succinctly and they can answer my questions so precisely is an indication that they're going to be a good source to work with. So that's win number one. If you get this into your press release, is that a journalist is going to think, interesting, I'd like to work with this source potentially. But win number two is if the journalist does like the idea of you and who you are. Most journalists, unless they're perhaps bloggers of their own blog, they tend to work in some sort of team or another. News production usually involves more than one person, and say if you go into broadcast and getting stuff on television and on air, that involves huge numbers of people. And of course, rolling news, the news process is constantly on, so that involves a lot of people and a lot of handovers of information. So what would happen when I was working on planning desks for BBC News, for Panorama, for things like that, I would get a press release I like the idea of, and I would put it in the news diary or the news calendar, which is what my middle icon is trying to show you here. And what I would do, if the boilerplate, if the words at the bottom about the source, about this business, were really good and really crisp, and like we've just been talking about through this talk, I would just cut and paste them into the news diary, the news calendar, and say, this is who this story is. This is who the story is from, or information about the source, or contact information or something like that. I would feed it in. And then where this gets really powerful and exciting for you as the innovator, as the person who's trying to get the word out about what you do, is that when I then had jobs where I then worked on air, or I was writing stuff for the newspaper, or to go out live on television, I would be looking at this news diary, this news calendar, and this press release. And I would be, if this description of this business was really clear, I would be pretty much cutting and pasting that, putting it in the scripts or in the stories. And these words that originate from the business itself are telling the story about what the business is. It's immensely powerful if you can get this right, because what this then means, if we go back to my kind of original diagram from the start of my talk, is if you're going to get the word out on a massive scale, and tends to be why people want to work with the media, they want to get the word out bigger and bigger. If you can get your story out in this kind of 50 words, unpacking these questions answers to these questions as I've suggested you do, you make it really easy for people to scrutinize your innovation, your business. You make it really easy for them to understand you, and you make it really easy for them to explain your innovation. If we're talking about television audiences, that's like, thousands, if sometimes millions of people who can now go out and about in the world and talk about you and what you do. And so fundamentally, that is why scrutiny is really crucial to innovation's success. So that's the end of my my presentation, my session. And so if there are questions from anybody, I can happily answer some of them now. If you have a question, but you're watching this on a replay or you've got to dash off, I've put my email address there. It's felicity@cowicom.com. And please don't hesitate to email me anything that you feel you want to, any questions that you want to ask me. I'm really happy to reply to them. And if you want to chat to me about working together, please do get in touch. I love dealing with new businesses, chatting to them and finding out what they do. One really common question that I am asked, this is probably one of the most common questions that I get asked about this whole process, is people say, I'm not a writer. I don't feel comfortable using words. I don't really know how I would even start with this, even though there's a grid. I'm very nervous. It takes me hours and hours and hours to find the right words. And what I always say to people is, I don't know if this is good or bad news, but I love writing, and I've done it like all my life. I've always been a sort of professional writer in some way or another. But the truth is, writing is very, very hard. And it almost feels like it gets harder to me the more you do it. So I don't say that to be terrifying, but more to, I think when people don't write very often and they read, brilliant headlines, or they see like their competitor get some great quote out in an article or something like that, they can feel a bit like, well, I couldn't do that because I'm not great with words. I don't like using words. But really what goes on behind the scenes, and certainly in newsrooms, is a huge amount of work to finesse words to get to headlines. Most headlines in national newspapers and broadcast channels are not written by one person. They're written by teams of people who are sort of helping each other out, and they're kind of worked on through the day as the story progresses sometimes, or just to get them right. So I think that's something I try to sort of encourage people, is like, this writing is messy. It's not, nobody's going to sort of just stick stuff in that grid straight away and job done. It is a really messy process to use words to get to the heart of what you're doing. But words are what we have. And if you can accept it's going to be quite messy, then it's a way of starting to get just to get stuff out of your head. It doesn't have to be perfect. And if you're really uncomfortable with it, once you've got a rough draft of this, you can take it to a copywriter or wordsmith of some sort and get them to give you some versions of it. There's nothing wrong with that. But this unpacking process, yes, it's using words, and yes, it is to do with writing, but if you can see it as a really rough way of working rather than producing a final perfect product, it's going to make life easier for you. If you really find it very difficult, and I do have clients like this, just feel very uncomfortable about writing for lots and lots of reasons, you can still do this process. I have had people do it, and they use the voice note on their phone to just riff, to just talk on each of the 4 topics. Who are you? What do you do? How do you do it? Where and when do you do it? Just chat on that. You can transcribe it if you want to, listen back to it, put some words in. You can certainly do it that way. And for people who are very visual, I have worked with people like that as well, and they just kind of put a big who, what, how, and where, when on big bits of paper and just sort of dash down words or pictures or whatever to help them. Really doesn't matter. The main thing is just getting it out of your head, so that you can see this information and you can start sharing it with the world. So thank you very much for that. If there are any other questions, I can happily take them. If not, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.